Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with you today. I am Carrie Philpott. I am one of the national educators for Husqvarna Viking sewing machines, and this is Facebook Live. I hope you're all coming into the room because we've got some exciting things to look at and discover today as we have a banquet of sewing treats for a Thanksgiving feast. Are you excited about that? I find Thanksgiving is one of my very favorite holidays of the entire year because not just memory-wise, but currently gathering with friends and family to enjoy a fabulous meal is a delight of the whole year. So I'm glad you're here with me. And one of the things that I am most grateful for this year, because Thanksgiving's about giving thanks, is the fact that I have the Husqvarna Viking Designer Applique 2. And I've got this lovely cover that I made for it, which was inspired by a trip I had a couple of years ago to Egypt. And of course, here is the beautiful Designer Applique 2 sewing machine. For those of you who have it, isn't it just the best? For those of you who are wanting one, you have excellent taste in sewing machines. Now, I have been sewing with Husqvarna Viking sewing machines for many more decades than I ever want to admit. And I have enjoyed watching it evolve over these years. When the Applique 2 was first released, I went, oh, they did it. They made my dream machine. And here it is in its total beauty. And it is a beautiful machine, isn't it? So we have our large touch screen. We have our 12.2 by 5 area where we can fit a whole king-size quilt. We have easy to use buttons. We have markings both for metric and for imperial sewing. And we have the take-up arm that allows the thread to come up and come down for smooth sewing. I like that particularly when I'm working with metallic threads. Now, today I haven't really been working with a whole lot of metallic threads, but when you look at a sewing machine where you have gazillion, over 1,000 actually, built-in decorative stitches, one of the things that I would recommend that you do is to make a sampler of some of these stitches. Otherwise, you're going to fall into what we educators refer to as our trap of only using the same 6 stitches. It's fun to sew out a sampler, and that way you can discover new friends and have that as a reference for different projects that you're going to be having in the future. I love the fact that this machine will allow you to sew through up to 13 layers of heavyweight Levi denim or over 30 layers of quilt cotton. The fact that it has the ability to adjust automatically for whatever you're sewing is a real treat. Something not every machine has on the market. Now, let's talk about Thanksgiving. What are you doing for Thanksgiving this year? I'm going to be joining up with my 96-year-old mother, brother, sister-in-law, cousins galore, and having a fabulous banquet feast. So the first thing we have to do is think about what I'm going to be bringing as a hostess gift. In this case, I'm going to, of course, be bringing a bottle of champagne. So I've made a pretty little wine cozy to go over the top of this bottle that I have decorated here. You notice I've used decorative buttons rather than just make it a bag so that it has a little flexibility for some of our narrower wine bottles or beer bottles, as the case may be. And with this, I have been able to use our buttonhole foot that comes with the machine, sensor buttonhole foot, which makes perfect buttonholes every time. And I've also been able to use the button sew foot. Now, if you're not familiar with that foot, it's one you really need to get down to your Husqvarna Viking dealership and have a look at because it makes sewing buttons on a snap. So that is one of our fabulous projects that I have here for you to see and to look at making. Another thing I'm going to be doing is I am going to be bringing a pie. And yes, I do actually make pumpkin pies from scratch. And so what I did was I made this nice little carrier so that I can carry a pumpkin pie and keep it nice and warm. Well, I'm going to be traveling 100 miles in a car, so it's not going to be that warm by the time I get there. But this is a cover that I made so that I can keep the pie all nice and in a tin. And I have embroidered the inside with this beautiful applique leaf design. Some of you may recognize this design because this is one that has been featured in a lot of social media from Husqvarna Viking lately, and they are showing it as a quilt block. So my challenge to you, when you are looking at these embroidery designs, this one does happen to come from the My Sewnet library, as well as the over 800 built-in embroidery designs in the Designer Applique 2, is to think about other uses for them. Because just because it says it's one thing, doesn't mean that that's how you have to do it. So in this case, I did this embroidery on linen. I did it so that it is reversible using variegated thread because it's fun to use something like that. And in this case, I happen to use, oops, right back here, the 150 by 150 hoop. I really love this hoop because it has a light setting for the inner hoop. It also comes with a heavier one. So depending upon whether you're doing something lightweight like linen or with the light hoop, or using the heavier one, if you're actually hooping the 3 layers of backing, batting, and quilt so that you can actually use your embroidery designs at home to do your quilting on your quilts. Pretty fun, isn't it? I also use the open toe foot to use one of our mini scallop stitches along the edging so that it has a beautiful finished look to it. And then just added little ribbon ties because, you know, along with being a pie carrier, you can set this down into any one of your serving bowls that you might have on your Thanksgiving table, like something to keep your rolls in or something bread. And of course, being that it's linen and cotton, machine washable, tumble dry. In fact, all of the projects I'm going to be showing you today are washable because that just makes cleanup a whole lot easier, doesn't it? Right. The next thing we're going to be looking at is the kitchen, because that's where we do the cooking, isn't it? Wouldn't be fun to do the cooking in the living room, would it? No, we're going to do the cooking in the kitchen. So this next project is actually a dish towel. Some of you may recognize this because this project was actually designed by one of my esteemed friends, Mickey Hudson, called Everything But the Kitchen Sink. And we did feature this as one of our executive designs that we were able to share with in-store projects this last year. I love the fact that there are many functions to this because along with using our quilt binding attachment, it also used the ruffler attachment. It also used our piping foot, and it has our laser pictogram stitches on it. That's something unique to this machine. And have you played with those? Have you experimented with them? Because there's so many fun things you can do with the laser pictogram stitches. So I made some examples out to share with you because when you look at them initially, they kind of look like hieroglyphics, don't they? You know, what do you do with those when they come up on your machine screen? Well, when you put them together, you create even more beautiful large-scale designs that you can use to decorate the project with or you can use them for quilting or for a multitude of different functions. But they're beautiful, aren't they? And they don't have to just be in a straight line. You can do them into motifs. All of these different designs came from Stitch 3 and Stitch 4 in our I menu. I love the fact that we have some of these unique things. Then across the top, I used the gathering foot. And for our beautiful pot holder that I have at the top of this, you can see that this is one of our built-in embroidery designs made for patchwork quilting in the hoop. And then on the inside, I used another one of our beautiful quilt designs. I used our buttonhole foot and our button sew foot to complete this. And it makes a great dish towel to have to hang from your stove. It also, though, if you take this off and add a waistband, you've got an apron. So there are lots and lots of different ways that you can use a design like this by putting together many of these different features and accessories that we have for our Husqvarna Viking Designer Applique 2. Pretty cool, isn't it? Now we're going to be decorating our table because we do want to have a pretty table, don't we? Well, years and years and years ago, in fact, on my very first Husqvarna Viking sewing machine, which happened to be a 6020, which gives you an idea of how long I actually have been using these machines, there was a function called Pictogram stitches. And that gave us the ability to combine different stitch elements to create new stitches. And you use the programming on the machine in order to do this. Well, you know, we've had a long way with embroidery in the machine, haven't we? It's not the same as it was when we first had our #1 Plus come out. Ooh, that was in the 1990s that we had our very first built-in embroidery machine. But they've kept the pictogramming functions on the machine, including having them here in our Husqvarna Viking Designer Applique 2. There's a whole screen of them that if you scroll along, it's in menu R. And that gives you an idea of what these little bits look like. Now, how do you make these pictogramming stitches happen? Programming them together. Now, once upon a time, programming, whether it was to write names or to combine stitches or whatever, was tedious. You had to get out the manual. You had to look through the manual. You had to read, push button, read, push button, read, push button, test sew, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Well, give you an example of how it works now is we have the button right here on the Applique 2. We touch that button and here we have a whole screen for programming. So if we go back to menu R, what we can do is we can take one of these stitch elements just like this, and it's showing us its length. And in this case, I have it set so that it's in millimeters, but you can very quickly in the settings screen change it to inches, depending upon which one of those measurements you're most comfortable with. You also have the ability to, in this case, shorten the stitch, narrow the stitch, mirror the stitch, although let's just mirror it once, duplicate it, and then mirror it. And then if we want to do just one, we can put in the fix button. We can put in our built-in thread snips. And by touching the little check mark on our built-in screen, there we have that stitch showing how it's going to stop in between each one, or you can continue on to have it be a continuous row. I think it's something that somebody said, why is it still on our machine when we have machines that do so much more? Well, this gives us the ability to have hundreds more stitches at our fingertips. So I made this beautiful sort of centerpiece that will go on the center of my table. And I'm thinking maybe just a candle to sit right here, right there. Very attractive, isn't it? Something that you can make as an heirloom for your family to enjoy for years and years and years. So, moving on, we want to look at a different kind of table runner. This is one that I created using patchwork of different fabrics, all within that theme. And I have gone ahead and quilted it using one of our favorite quilt stitches in menu D, which is like the little chicken scratch ones. You like those, don't you? I do. I use them a lot. And being turkey time, I thought that would be appropriate. Then for quilting on this, what I used was one of our single stitch that we have in menu O. Have you explored those on your machine? I think it would be fun for you to be able to think, oh, if I want to quilt this, I can just put on my S-foot and it will sew and quilt that all the way through to the back side so that it's something that is easily quilted, and using it as a decorative part of the quilting rather than using it just as something to hold the layers together. Now here on the side, what I've used is one of our laser pictogram stitches. And with the laser on the attachment right here, you can see the red line come popping through here. That's the laser, which of course we can adjust its brightness. We can adjust and move it side to side. It's a great way for us to be able to even create more stitches and to have them line up so that we can do them in a perfectly straight line. Now, I talked a little bit about how this machine can handle heavyweight fabrics. But before I go into that, let me just see if there are any questions that any of you have been asking. So let's see, we have one that says, you have a Topaz 50, so it probably won't help me in learning something new. Well, that's not completely true, because the Topaz 50 is a fabulous machine. And what I have done, although I have featured some of the extra stitches that we have on the Designer Applique 2, many of these stitches and many of these techniques are also available on your Topaz 50, because that is a great, lovely Husqvarna Viking machine. So please stay with me, because some of these things may be of interest to you as well, such as making freestanding lace. Now, this is something that was a built-in design, once again, to make the lace using my very favorite stabilizer, Aqua Magic, because this is one that, although it hoops and feels very much like a tearaway stabilizer, when you dip it in water, it completely dissolves away. So that way you have lace that is freestanding. And what I have done on this is the clothesline. How many of you have been playing with clothesline in your machine and found out how lovely it is to have that sensor foot that senses that you're going through something that is very thick and very heavy and still be able to maintain perfect tension? This is one that I did using variegated thread, both in the bobbin as well as on the top, using a wide zigzag stitch from menu A. This is one that I just decorated, but this is the one that I really love, because here we have one that you can use as a coaster for your drink. Here we have one that you can use under your salad or soup plate. And this is one that you can have to put your turkey on, because look at the thickness of that clothesline that I used here. It's almost more like piping, isn't it, than clothesline. Our machine could handle it. Isn't that lovely? How it could do that. And then I just added the freestanding lace just to give it a little bit of pop, because that makes it a little bit more decorative. And when we're making our table, we do like to have it look pretty and decorative. Okay. But along with being able to have a centerpiece or a table runner or something to put your drinks on, we need to have some kind of a placemat. In this case, what I have done is I have created a Madeira applique placemat. This is a very fun project that you can do because it gives you the ability to have fun with your machine. And yes, you can do this easily on your Topaz 50. So if you're thinking of that, this is one you can do. With Madeira applique, you cut out a center area, and then I zigzagged using a wing needle. What is a wing needle? For those of you who have not seen a wing needle before, I happen to have one right here. This is one where it has a blade that is wider. So as it goes down through the fabric, it actually makes indentations. Traditionally, it's used in heirloom sewing techniques. But I like to take traditional techniques and make them into something completely different. You know, like quilting things that you'd think of only for quilts, make them into a table runner. Heirloom techniques, make it into home dec. Embroidery, not just for clothes, not just for quilts, but for all kinds of different projects that you could be thinking of doing. Think and dream, and Husqvarna Viking sewing machines make it happen. So continuing on with what I did, using the wing needle all the way around here, I then, and I'm going to flip this over because it is reversible, I used our free motion foot to quilt the inside, and then used one of our decorative stitches to quilt on diagonal lines so that it is firm and sturdy and ready for you to be able to use. Now, this is one of the designs that I've done in a Thanksgiving theme. But these placemats are so fun and so decorative that it's something that you can do for other holidays. You can do them in blues and silvers and whites. You can do them in greens and reds and golds. You can do them in pinks and blues, purples and yellows, or red, white, and blue. Are you getting an idea of different holidays that you can do this for? And being that they're like this, they're durable, they are machine washable. So if somebody drips a little bit of that wine on there, it's not the end of the world. And you can do them, fold them up easily for storing. And if you get tired of looking at it like this, then just flip it over because it is completely reversible. I think that's pretty cool, don't you? Now, to go on top, we need to think about having some napkins, don't we? Now, I personally love to make napkins, and they're easy for us to be able to do on our Husqvarna Viking machines. This one is just quilt cotton that I have taken, and I have decorated the corner with one of our built-in embroidery designs that uses cut work. How many of you have played with cut work and how easy it is to do? Cut work comes with a variety of different needles. Well, let me get some of these accessories out so that I can share them with you. Cut work needles come in a package, and they're different ones. And each one is numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. And number 3, of course, is on my other machine at the moment because I'm using it for another project I'm working on. But they have different shapes to the actual cutting tip on them. So you use them progressively while you're doing the embroidery, and that gives you the ability to have open spaces. This is another case where I use the Aqua Magic so that I was able to hoop that in my 150 by 150 hoop and be able to do the sewing on this with the variegated thread to create this beautiful sort of part. But I felt that the napkin needed a little something more. So what I did was I used our Pintuck Foot. Pintuck is another one that is traditionally used in making heirloom projects. But I like the idea of just adding those extra few layers of decoration to this napkin as plain fabric. It certainly doesn't look plain anymore, does it? And then for the outside edge, I used my variegated threads to do a rolled hem on my Husqvarna Viking Amber Air 400 serger. I love that serger, and although I'm not really featuring it so much here today, it is one of the best sergers I have worked with in years. It has 15 different stitches that are built into it, and it can make not just edges on napkins, but you can do all kinds of fun things with it. So it's something for you to think about. If you haven't worked with a serger lately, it's a great way of getting something done very quickly because they do more stitches a minute than what you have on a sewing machine. Although you do over 1,000 stitches a minute on our Designer Applique 2, we have the ability to do even more stitches, like up to 1,500 stitches a minute, on our Amber Air 400 serger. Now, this was another little serger project that I actually did with my sewing machine to make the napkin ring. I took fabric and just serged the edges together and turned it right sides out, and then put a wire through the middle so that I am then able to fold this over like this to make a napkin ring. And of course, I used my variegated thread, but think of all the beautiful ways you could use some of your exclusive stitches that we have on the machine to be able to do this. Okay, I see we have another question, so let me check with that before we talk about our next napkin, and that is, can you embroider right onto clothesline projects? And the answer to that is yes, you can. I use, in that case, my metal hoop because it is magnetic. So where did I put those clothesline pieces? Ooh. They have jumped off somewhere. But what I would do is I would lay it down with a layer of Aqua Magic behind it and then use the magnets to secure it so that you can then embroider on this. This machine will embroider through the density. You do have to make a few adjustments on your tension. I would definitely loosen my top tension, take it up to around 4 or so, depending upon what design you're using, because it normally would come in at around 2.5. So go ahead and adjust your tension up so that you're going to have more coming through on your bobbin side. But that's the way I would do that for embroidering right onto the clothesline. Although in the ones that I showed you with the freestanding lace, I did do that separately because I wanted to be able to have the lace look like lace rather than just fabric. Right, another question we have is, what kind of thread do you use for washable projects? Great question. Thread. One of the great mysteries we have in sewing is thread, isn't it? Along with needles. In fact, I would find when I'm actually doing an event, those are two areas where I have the most questions that come up is what needle do I use and what thread should I use? On washable projects such as these, I have used polyester thread rather than cotton thread. And the reason is that for the ones that are actually going to be on the table, I might want to bleach these after I'm done. When you are doing any kind of embroidery or sewing project where bleach might be something that you're going to want to have in your arsenal of cleaning up afterwards, and this goes for clothing, such as baby clothes, as well as things that are going to be out in direct sunlight. Those are things that are all ones where fading can happen if you use cotton or rayon threads. So yes, on these I did use polyester thread. What I will say is whether you're using cotton thread, polyester thread, rayon thread, silk thread, linen thread, wool thread, or acrylic thread, is buy good quality thread, because it makes a difference in not just how it looks, but it also is good for the machine, because you want to make sure that you're taking care of the investment that you're making in your sewing machine. So that's an excellent question. The first one I showed was the cut work. With the Pintuck Foot. And in this case, this design is one that is built into the Designer Applique 2, and I added the pin tucking to go with that. Then I showed programming a napkin that was a ready-made napkin with the sequins that are another built-in stitch that we can do. And I'm going to take us back to our sewing. Do you see how easy it is for me to be able to just push the button, and there we are now on our sewing screen? Not like we have to go and do all kinds of different things, but here it's showing how I program that stitch in, and how on the screen it's showing us in real size what that is. The next napkin I showed you happened to be one of our designs that is featured in the My Sewnet library. The My Sewnet library has over 7,000 designs, and on this machine, it's completely one where you can just access it with your subscription right on the screen of the machine. And the final napkin that I was going to show you is once again one of these ready-made napkins, and I just wanted to decorate it with something different. So what I did was I used one of our other exclusive stitches that happens to be available. So what I did here was, once again, I went into the programming feature, because it is just so easy to do that. And I went to, and this happens to be in menu L, where we have our dimensional stitches. What I wanted to do was I wanted to have the flower, and then I wanted to have leaves underneath it. And so by touching just like that, I was able to create this design. And while I'm creating this design, I can change its length and its width so that I can work out exactly, here it says 66 millimeters, how to make perfect corners so that it will exactly match as it's going on. And it's fun to think about these, because these are stitches that are unique to Husqvarna Viking. People don't have these stitches available. So it's one that you can make and have available to do all kinds of creative things. In fact, here I've done them with cotton. Here I've done them with glitter flex. And here I did it with a mylar balloon that had deflated. It's wonderful to think that we can repurpose and reuse, and once again have these as something that you can use to expand your creativity. I happen to find that the only thing that is holding me back with this machine is the fact that I may not think it or feel it or dream it. So think, feel, and dream what it is that you would like to create, because it's all possible on a Husqvarna Viking machine. I have talked a lot about the Designer Applique 2. This isn't the only machine, though, that we have that you can make all of these beautiful projects on. If you are somebody who likes to do embroidery, wants to do embroidery, enjoys doing embroidery, or is just curious to get into embroidery, we also have the brand new Designer Ruby 90. It has many of the same features that we happen to have on this machine, but it does have a few differences. It's worth going to your Husqvarna Viking dealer and having a look at it just to see how they compare. We also have the Husqvarna Viking Designer Sapphire 85. And it's a little bit smaller. It's 10 inches rather than 12.2 inches across. And that means that you can get a good queen size quilt in there if you're wanting to quilt it yourself. It has a little smaller screen, but it is a dynamo machine for you to have. Then there are those of you out there that say, I don't want to do embroidery. I couldn't care less about that embroidery thing. And I have to tell you that when I got my #1 Plus, which was my first Husqvarna Viking embroidery machine, I told them to actually keep the embroidery unit because I was never going to do that embroidery stuff. That was something I did by hand. I had no interest in it at all. And the dealer that I was working with at that time said, you're paying for it. Take it home. And on the next rainy day, and I live in Portland, Oregon, so the next rainy day, of course, was later that afternoon, and pulled it out and said, give it a try. Well, that happened to be in the month of September. By December, every single thing that I made had embroidery on it. I was completely hooked. But at the same time, it just may not be your interest. Or you may want a machine where you are able to do sewing while your other machine is embroidering. We have the Designer Quilt 980. And it is exactly like the Applique 2 in terms of its size, its function, its 9mm stitches, and all of the beautiful features of this machine. But it comes without the embroidery function. So it's the perfect sewing, quilting, and crafting machine. If you want something that's not quite as big as this, we have the Quilt Designer 75Q, which is very similar to the Sapphire 85 or the Brilliance 80, which we have had in the line up until about a year ago. And that one is another machine that has lots of capabilities, lots of abilities to be able to do a lot of the sewing functions that you see on these machines, including the clothesline. So that is a great alternative if it is something that you just really don't want to do. And being creative is a fabulous way of being, with or without the embroidery function. Let's see what other questions we've had come in. Okay. Let's see. Where did I get the fancy magnets for my hoop? Oh, that is a delightful question. Well, actually, those magnets were something that were a gift with attending one of our special educator events that we held throughout 2019 in different Husqvarna Viking stores. So that's where I got those beautiful magnets. Now, what I would suggest you do is, if you really like those magnets, send an email off to the education department at husqvarnaviking.com and tell them that you want us to bring back the magnets. All right? All right. Okay. Now, next question I have is, when you embroider clothesline projects, do you put a water-soluble topper on them as well? Another great question. And I would say, if you are going to be embroidering directly onto the clothesline, it's always a good idea to use a topper. Now, what is a topper? Okay, when you are doing, and I'm just going to pull up this napkin as an example. When you are doing embroidery, you have a hooped piece where you have the stabilizer. Then you have your project, and a topper is another piece of stabilizer that you put over the top. And the reason I would say to use a topper is when you are doing napped fabric, because sometimes the needle and the thread doesn't always agree with the loops on corduroy, or the dimension of velvet, or the nap on velour, or on the loops on clothesline. So when you are going to actually have a topper on there, it gives it a smooth surface to be able to embroider over. So what toppers would I recommend? Well, there are two that I recommend, and these come from the Inspira line of stabilizers that are available at your Husqvarna Viking dealer. One is one I already talked about, and that is the Aqua Magic. It looks, though, like paper, and sometimes you want to see what's going on. So the one that I use is one that is called Clear and Melt. And it looks a little bit like saran wrap, but it does not actually dissolve away in water. It is one that melts away to the touch of a medium dry iron. And it is one that I used actually when I was embroidering on the cover here, because with this burlappy fabric, I wanted to make sure I had a smooth finish to my embroidery. So I used it to go through with a medium dry iron to melt away the clear and melt. Now on towels, this is a particularly useful stabilizer to use because it puts a permanent barrier between your project and your embroidery. So it's in there. And that way on towels, if you've used a wash-away stabilizer in that part, what happens is the loopies will eventually start to poke through on your embroidery. With clear and melt, that doesn't happen. So that's an excellent question. I really appreciate that question. Let's see if there's any others. Oh, a very good question has just come in, and that is the difference. What is the difference between a Husqvarna Viking Designer Epic 1 and a Designer Epic 2? And there are a considerable number of differences. Yes, they are the same size. Yes, they have the same size screen. Yes, they have the same beautiful LED lighting. They have also the arm so that your thread will relax. But in many ways, that's where a lot of the changes then come in. First of all, on this machine, and I had this set up so that I could show you how the Quilt Binder works, because that's something that a lot of you always question. How do I actually work the Quilt Binder? And so I'm going to just sort of slide it out of the way. This machine is a 9mm machine, meaning that when you are doing your decorative stitches, and I am just going to go back here and select one of my decorative stitches. So we'll find one where it really is going to show us the difference. We'll just take this one right here in Decorative Stitch, Menu F, stitch number 16. Oh, we've got quite a little bit going on there. Let's just make it a nice, clear your screen, and we will take on this stitch right here. Now it's showing us, of course, our information here, but down here it's showing us 9 millimeters. That means that we can make it narrower and shorter, but the 9 millimeter width is 2 millimeters wider than what you have with the 7 millimeter machine, which is what you have on the Designer Applique 1. Having those extra 2 millimeters gives you additional needle positions. So if you are going to be in your straight stitch, this happens to be one of our quilt stitches. Let's find our actual straight stitch. You can actually move the needle just a little bit further over to the side to be able to stitch on this. Where on the Applique 1, it's a little bit narrower in terms of your choice of being able to move the needle as a 7 millimeter machine. It has the same absolutely beautiful built-in needle threader, which is great. It also has the built-in laser that you have on this machine for being able to do our laser pictogram stitches, as well as when you're doing stitching the ditch. You line that up and you can see perfectly how it's going to align. And I showed that on our table runner in how I was able to perfectly align doing our little chicken scratches right down the center, because I had the laser set up so that it would guide that right on through. The other big difference that you have is, although the Designer 1 or the Applique 1 is a Wi-Fi capable machine, the Designer Applique 2 has the ability to bring designs and images straight down from the MySewNet cloud. It's a little bit more complicated to do that on the Designer Applique 1. So a lot of people really love their Applique 1s, don't necessarily want to go into their Applique 2, but they want to have a machine that has the Wi-Fi capabilities that you have on the Designer Applique 2. So that is where the Designer Ruby 90 comes into play, because it is very similar to the Designer Applique 1, but it has the full Wi-Fi capability. Right, so any other questions that we have out there? All right. Oh, you want to get in closer and see what it looks like to do the quilt binder. But I also wanted to talk about one of our other specialties that come with this machine, and that is the ribbon embroidery attachment. My shirt happens to be a ribbon embroidery design. This is one that is found in the MySewNet library, but this is an absolutely fun attachment for being able to add even more dimensions to your machine. The other thing I wanted to share with you is the programmable foot control. So what does the programmable foot control give us? It gives us multi-functions that we can do, not just by sewing, by pushing your foot straight down, but by programming your heel function. And you can program it into all of these different functions of cut, stitch restart, foot up and down with extra lift, reverse, or fix function. But say you want a combination of these. You don't want to just cut. You also want to have the ability to raise the foot up. Well, it has the side wings so that you can actually program them to do different features. So as you're sewing along, you can cut, you can restart, and you can reverse. Excuse me, all by using your foot. This is really coming from the industrial machine lines. In being able to use this foot, you are able to keep both hands on the project rather than trying to reach up here and find the different buttons that we have that give you much of those same functions. The quilt binder is one, though, that many people have asked about because they want to know, how do I really use the quilt binder in the best way? Well, it will fit onto our machine, and yes, it will work on the Topaz 50. You do have to get a different needle plate for your machine, which you can get from your Husqvarna Viking dealer. It also works with your diamond and your ruby machines that you have had and loved in the past. Oh, that's where those went. I just simply covered them up in front of me. This happens to be a way, though, for being able to quickly bind your quilts. And I love the fact that we can do this quickly and easily. So what I've done is I've made a little quilt sandwich here where I have the cotton, the batting, and the backing. I've serged the edges. And when I am doing any kind of quilt binding, whether by hand or by machine, I do serge the edge because it just makes it a little bit easier to have that guide and that ability all right there. Now, I am going to start off by selecting stitch A2, which is our straight stitch. I am going to tap them so I have the center needle position. Quilt binding strips. First of all, you cut them at 1 3/4 rather than 2 1/2, so you get to save some fabric right off the bat. Wrong side of the fabric facing you. Feed the fabric, and I do cut it with the diagonal just because it makes it a little bit easier. And bring it all the way through until you see it starting to fold. I also treat these with some best press so that they have a little bit more body to them. I fold to make my binding, and then I take it straight back. And straight back is one of the things that really makes a difference in being able to do this. And you can also see here that I have the laser right now showing me exactly where the needle is going to stitch the binding on to this. Now, I would like to have my needle a little bit closer. There's two ways of doing that. You can either adjust the binder, or because it's a 9mm machine, you can just move your needle. And so when I have it like this, I can now, okay, I think that's a little bit close to the edge than I want it. Test, test, test. Always make sure that you've got it exactly where you want it. Oh, I tapped the foot pedal to make it go in reverse. And it's still going in reverse. There we go. Now, here's the question so many of you have asked. How do you do the mitered corner? So right up to the edge. And then cut your threads. Then pull straight back so that your fabric has the body in it so that it is easy for you to then fold and fold. And if you need to have a little extra, you pull a little extra down so that you have that perfect corner all ready to go. Then pull back. Oops, and it popped out of its little guides. Set it right on the corner. Make sure you have everything all lined up. And you can continue to sew. And in this case, I'm going to put the needle down so you can see here a perfect mitered corner. But there's more that you can do with this than just that straight stitch. Say you want to have a decorative finish that you're going to be putting on this. Well, you can go in and you can select one of your decorative stitches. So I am going to select stitch number 5. And I'm using the open toe foot to do this because I want to be able to see exactly where things are going to be happening. And in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to raise the needle. I am going to move the quilt binder so that it's right on the edge, looking at the dot that we have right here. Tighten it down. And now I am doing the binding edge with one of my decorative stitches. But there's more. Let's go back to our programming. Let's go to one of our beautiful built-in fonts. And that was another one of our differences that we have is we have some different built-in fonts because they have the ability to go into a wider width. So I'm going to type in this case, this happens to be Cyrillic, and I'm going to go back to my block, and I'm going to type in my name, Carrie, and I'm going to put a stop in there so that it's only going to sew it once. And I'm going to, at this case, take off my integrated dual feed. Whoop. Always check my thread. And what it is doing now is it is writing my name into the binding. Cut the threads. And I'm going to bring this out. So you can see how you can write words in your binding. Think of that for wedding quilts, baby quilts, graduation quilts, that you don't just have to do a straight line with a perfect mitered corner. You can also use your decorative stitches and you can use the programming to write words. And I just got the reminder that I forgot to mention one of the big differences with this machine and the Applique one is the integrated dual transfer system, IDF, as it is called. This is very important for people who want precision sewing because what it is doing is it, along with the additional feed dogs that we have here in the front, it is adding a set of feed to the top. And people will say, well, how is that different from a walking foot? Well, historically, it is important to realize that walking foot was created to imitate this feed system that has been found in industrial machines for quite some time. What it does with a walking foot, you have your feed dogs here on the bottom, and you have feed dogs in the walking foot, but they don't always line up exactly. Oftentimes you'll get a bit of slippage going on. So with the integrated dual feed system, what they are is they perfectly align, just like this. And so it grips and feeds and grips and feeds both forward and backwards so that you have perfect feed. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing it on 3 layers of fabric, whether you're doing it on 1 layer of fabric, or whether you're doing it on 10 layers of fabric. You have perfect feed throughout the whole sewing experience that you have. All right, so there is any more questions that we might have coming in. Please let me know what they are, because I'm looking forward to being able to share more on this machine, because there's just so much for us to enjoy on it in everything that we do. Okay, any more questions coming in? No, I don't see any more. And so we're kind of running out of our time that we have allotted for this. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me for our banquet of sewing treats for your Thanksgiving feast on the beautiful Designer Applique 2 that you can also create on other Husqvarna Viking machines. It's important for you to be able to go to your Husqvarna Viking dealer and see all of the fantastic offerings. If that's a little out of the way for you, make sure to visit the website, www.husqvarnaviking.com, and you can find all the information on all of our machines and different projects, different feet that I have shown you today. I also wanted to say thank you. Gratitude is an important part of Thanksgiving, and gratitude is something that we should have every single day of our lives. And Thanksgiving is merely a reminder that we should bring that forward in our lives. So thank you. And I'm saying this with gratitude in my heart for being here with me today. And happy sewing.